Okay, so just quickly looking at our word cloud, I do really love the two that people have doubled down on, awkward and helpful. I think that's very valid. So if either of these are your experience, or really anything other than the free space one, which I don't get, maybe that's an inside joke, this talk is for you. So just to make sure you're in the right room, this is Let's Get Uncomfortable, How to Ask for and Process Feedback. Right now we're talking about personal feedback. We're not talking about work-related feedback, as in like code feedback. And I think it's important to start off with like who I am and why do I care about the feedback process to begin with. A bit about me. My name is Cori Neslund. I'm a program manager at Palantir.net. I've been with them for about 3 years. But before I was at Palantir, I had a completely different life. I lived a completely different life doing a completely different thing that had nothing to do with web development or Drupal or anything. And it was a very large professional services company, and this was how they did feedback. This is the interpretation of the 2 questions that people could ask about their colleagues. So 4 times a year, they would send out an anonymous pulse, except for you could look up anyone in the company that you wanted to, and you could submit feedback for them answering these 2 questions totally anonymously. Anonymous to you and the other person. The company knew who submits them, but it was an open book style thing. So essentially there were 2 questions, and one of them got at, do you like this person? Do you want to work with them? Are they cool? Like, would you not mind being on a team with them? And then the other one was, if it was your money, would you give them a raise? And these are the only 2, this was the only style of feedback that you ever got. If you got management feedback, as in your manager gave you feedback, you were very lucky. Most managers decided to opt out of the process because they knew they had this. And so every 4 times a year, you would get this report. Now imagine you're the little black dot at the top. Like, you cool with this? Like, this is great. In case you're curious, all these other dots, these are your coworkers in your office, at your level, in your team. So if you know you have 15 people, this is their actual dot. This is you in relation to them. But what happens if something happens and maybe you go through a personal tragedy or something like that, or you have a manager where you just didn't get along? It has nothing to do with whether the work was good, you guys just weren't up to snuff. What happens if you go from here to here? What does that do to you? If this is the only thing you get. And fun fact about these, when they came out, it would crash the internal servers because everybody would be rushing to try and get to their report to see where they were at that quarter. So it would just be a dead silence. Someone would say the email has gone out. Dead silence in the entire office. This was before remote work was a bigger thing. And then it would just crash everything. And everybody would be waiting, refreshing for like 10 minutes. Like, oh my God, where's my scatter plot? Because this is all you got. So when I left that universe, I was like, I never want to do this ever again. This is the most demoralizing, terrible system that you could ever imagine. And it's entirely based on fear. So the only thing that's happening right here is the company is telling you, you better be in that top quadrant or you're going to have a problem. And I don't care what you have to do to get these 2 things over, but you got to do that. So you'd see, just like what you're seeing here, a few people scattered down and then a huge bundle at the top. And you may or may not be able to game this system if you had enough friends.
Did anybody like game this system?
Yes.
I'll operate
Yes.
you if you operate me.
Absolutely, 100%. But because it's also anonymous and anyone can look you up, if you have a problem with a manager and in a regular system, maybe you'd be able to skip them, you'd be able to bypass them, go to someone else and be like, you work with me more regularly, what's your more honest opinion? You can't bypass them. That person similarly can also say, Bob sucks. Everybody, I want you to go in and rate Bob and say that they're terrible. Bob may not have done anything at all, but this entire system can be gamed. So, obviously a lot of flaws here. Leaving this very damaging experience, I was like, I never want to do that again. I will never work for any company that ever does that again. And I don't, thank goodness. So what we're going to talk about today is how I recovered from that system, which was terrible. I did that for years. And kind of like what's an option for you if you are interested in getting feedback at your workplace that you're driving. So we're not talking about your end of year performance report. We're talking about you wanting to know how you're doing and how you're growing. So what's in scope for today? One, why you should take control of the feedback process, as in do not allow it to be just that scatter plot or just the performance end of year performance review. What being feedback positive means as far as a mindset, how to ask for it, and then how to assess what you hear. We're actually going to go through a real example. I do feedback every 6 months, so we're going to go through one of my actual feedback reports from about a year and a half ago. So be nice to me. I'm just kidding. You can be mean. What's out of scope? We're not going to talk about how to give feedback to others. That's a completely different topic. We're focused on you today. So, some assumptions just to get out of the way. You know your situation best. You're capable of changing your mindset to be whatever you'd like it to be. And you work in an environment where it's safe to ask for feedback. So we're also not talking about an environment like you have a toxic manager or something like that, and it's literally going to be impossible for you to get anything other than weaponized feedback. We're not talking about that. And then you're able to assess the validity of the feedback provided to you. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that and what that means when we get into the actual example. So, why should you take ownership of this feedback process, besides that terrible scatter plot that I showed you? Feedback most of the time in most organizations, when the only thing that they're giving you is that year-end review that's somehow attached to whatever black box they use to create your promotion, that is not attached to you. It's not necessarily attached to your growth. It's kind of a top-down model where someone is saying, hey, in order to be successful at this role, I want you to be able to do this task in an hour, and right now you're doing it in 3. Maybe you want to do that, but maybe you don't. So in this system, we're saying we're going to take the direction. We're going to decide which direction we want to go and how we want to grow. And therefore, it's our accountability to make sure that we're reaching for those experiences that are going to give us that opportunity. Traditional and self-driven, a little bit obvious, right? Like traditional, this is what we're talking about, the performance review, the scatter plot. It's tied to someone else. It's not what you want, it's what they want you to do for your role. And then self-driven is for you. Sometimes these two things are going in the same track, sometimes they're not. That's okay, either way. But right now what we're trying to talk about is if you want to grow in your field, how would you go about doing that, and how would you assess whether you're hitting that goal that you're setting for yourself? So to do that, you kind of have to adopt a feedback positive mindset. And roughly what this means is that when someone gives you feedback, even if you're bummed to hear it at the time, and we'll talk about an example of that, although I'm sure everyone in this room can already think about a time where they were given feedback they were bummed to hear at the time, you're going to view it as a gift, as in that person is trying to tell you something, assuming that it's not malicious, right? They're trying to tell you something so that you can grow. Whether or not their delivery is great is another question. We're going to not allow fear to stop us from asking. I hear this a lot from folks where they're like, I don't want to start the feedback process because if I ask and I don't like what I hear, what does that mean about me and my role? And have I triggered something now by asking and getting bad feedback back? I don't know what that means, but and then we're going to accept responsibility for our own growth. So you know what you want out of your career and your life. It's your responsibility and your accountability to go out and do that. And then you are going to exercise your agency as a person with your own goals, standards, and values. And that's also completely separate from your actual work or employment. It's about you. So I work with this really wonderful woman named Jill Farley, and she said basically feedback is user research on yourself. So hopefully all the nerds in this room think that's a good joke. She laughed when she told it to me, so I told her I would include it in this presentation. She's a UXer. So, and this is true, right? When we talk about feedback that we're going out and we're looking for, we're trying to find out what our reputation and our impression is among our coworkers and our colleagues. It's important for you to know where you're doing really well and where you could improve. So how do you ask for it? This one really kills people sometimes when I talk about it. It's a cycle. So you don't just go and ask someone for feedback one time and then you're like, great, I've gotten the feedback. I'm set now for the next 8 years. That's not how it works. You have to keep doing it. You have to keep going through the full process, like planning for it, asking it, assessing it, doing something about what you've heard, and then starting over. If you just do it one time or you do it super infrequently, like maybe even like once a year maximum, you're not going to have the same kind of results as if you make it some kind of regular process within your life. It just doesn't work. So it's not singular. And we're going to go over all of these like individual growth, like individual parts of this in a second. So don't worry about like, oh no, I've only seen this slide one time. I have no idea where we're going. So that's the cycle. The first one is the planning stage. And the planning stage has 3 steps. 1, you're going to identify your goals. 2, you're going to choose the format in which you're going to go ask for feedback. And then 3, you're going to select targeted questions. You need to do all of this before you go into asking for feedback, because if you don't know what your goals are, for example, I'm a program manager. I would care about my ability to work well with clients or to hit the budget or to make sure that my team is happy and healthy. If I didn't think about my goals or how that relates to my work, I would have a really hard time designing feedback questions that are going to push me any further down that path. So let's talk formats. So you've identified your goals. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. Now you got to figure out how you're going to ask people for feedback. There are 4 general types. One is in the moment. This is like you just got out of a meeting, you gave a presentation, you just pull someone aside and we're like, hey, how did that go? Did I do a good job? And then another one is short interviews. I really strongly recommend you start here. If you've never done this before, short interviews is the way to go. It's 10, 15 minutes. You've got 3 questions. It's one-on-one, very low risk. And low time commitment for you and the other person. You get right into it very quickly. Then you have a deep dive, which is particularly good for people who haven't asked for feedback in a really long time or who have just delivered something. Like you just delivered a massive project. You want to talk about everything that you did over the last 8 months or a year, however long it ran, with someone who would know and get much more specific about what they're going to give you feedback on. And then the last one is sometimes a hit or miss. So the feedback survey can be very helpful if you are very nervous about asking for feedback the first time or just in general. Like if you think that you're not going to be able to have a one-on-one face-to-face conversation, you can do a survey. I like to try and think of it as like the shallow end of the pool. Like if you're just starting to like step into asking for feedback, start with the survey, but don't stay there, right? If you want to learn how to swim, you got to move beyond the 2 feet part of the pool. And then this is also really good if it's with like a broad group of people where you're asking like one question, so it's not a huge time commitment. People can just click in, answer it, and be done with it, which I would sometimes use as like a temperature check. So I'm not actually going through my full feedback cycle. I just want a quick temperature check. And those 2 cases are really the only ones I would recommend the survey because it can come across as impersonal to the people who are receiving it, and they may not be willing to answer truthfully in a written way. It makes some people kind of like shut down on giving honest feedback. So we've got these 4 general ones. If you do any research about asking for feedback or getting feedback, people have all sorts of branded ways that they call these, like they have their own little special flavor, but these are essentially the 4 versions. So now you know what your goals are. For example, if you're a program manager and I want to be better at delivering bad news to clients, that could be a goal. Maybe I want to ask about some times where I've talked to clients and it did go well and it didn't go well. And now I've picked my format. So now the next question is naturally like, what should you ask? So you want to tie all of your questions to your goals. If my goal is client management, I would not ask, hey, how do you think I did my hair? Does my hair look really nice in a picture? Like who cares? Like great, that's some feedback that might be helpful for someone else, but it's not tied to my goal at all. I want to refrain from asking questions that can be answered with yes or no, because inevitably everyone will answer either yes or no. If you give them the option to opt out and not provide you any other information, many people will opt out and provide you no more information. And then consider action-oriented questions. I always close with one of these at least. I've never done a cycle where I don't have an action-oriented one because when someone else gives you like an action, they're already considering, hey, if you did something differently, how might that affect me? And so they can give you a suggestion that would have resolved or it strengthened an area that you're already good at. They've already done the thinking for you. So you just get to harvest everybody else's thoughts without having to do it yourself. Really love that. Okay, so now you know your goals, you have your format, you've selected your questions, now you're going to go get it. A lot of people really struggle with the go getting part. Because either they haven't done it before and so they're really nervous, or they feel like if I put time on someone's calendar, is that going to be annoying to them? Like, how do I ask people for feedback without coming across as whatever type of way that you think it's going to be received? I would say for the folks who are really nervous, which is the most common thing I hear, it's really not that bad. And I promise you that it gets a lot better after you've done it like 6, 8, 12 times. The first time is always way harder than any of the others. So, that being said, a couple important notes. Please don't go request direct feedback if you're not able to hear it at that time. So maybe you're right in the midst of like a very stressful, ongoing project that it seems like maybe it's going out of scope or something like that. Don't go ask for feedback. You're probably not in a mindset to be able to hear it. And when you ask for feedback, people are going to assume that you're going to action on it. So if you go ask for it and then you weren't in a place to hear it, then you're probably not in a place to action on it. And they're going to think, like, why did I give you that feedback? Why'd you come ask for it? And the next time you ask them for it, they may be more hesitant. So then the second one is recognize that an individual's opinion is only their opinion. This is a big one. Like that manager who maybe you don't get along with, they may have very valid feedback to give you, but it might be wrapped in around a lot of stuff that you don't agree with because your relationship is not good. That's their opinion of the situation. You're just asking for it. You don't have to take it into yourself and say that it's 100% true. And we'll talk about how to analyze that in a second. And then this one is really key for people who are nervous about giving you feedback. So you might be nervous for asking for it, but a lot of the people that you're going to ask for feedback are going to be nervous on their own side because they don't know if they have something constructive to tell you. They don't know how you're going to respond to it. So share deliberately that you are open to hearing their perspective and that you're looking for honest feedback. This is very key. If they hear you say it, if you write it in the meeting request, if you do both, like that will relieve some of the tension for them. So, you've asked feedback. Let's say you did the short interview things, which is the example that I'm going to show you. You talked to like 10 people or 5 people, however big your team is. Now you have to compile all the results. You need to assess the context of the information that was provided you and then put on your thinking cap and say, I got to look for bias. I got to look for bias in myself and I need to look for bias in the other person. And then you get to decide what information you're going to accept or reject. You have full power to do either one. So before we get into that, and before we actually get into my actual feedback, feedback does not equate to an evaluation of your intrinsic value or identity. Remember, these are just other people's opinions. You're asking for how you're being perceived in the workplace. It does not automatically make it true. And even if it is true, let's say you've made a mistake, and that mistake had consequences, and that person is telling you about it, does not mean that you're a bad employee. It doesn't mean you're bad at your job or anything like that. Asking for the feedback is the first step to resolving that situation and having it not show up again in the future. So even if you've made a mistake, even if you feel a little bit like hurt by what you hear, it's okay. You can move through it. And you're the one who decides if what they say is valuable or not. So, here's me. Give me a second to read that. So in this system, I asked 3 questions. What is one thing that I'm doing well and should keep doing? What is one thing I could do that would make working with or interacting with me better? And how can I make your job easier? So technically, all of these are action-oriented questions, but the first one is a little bit more like retroactive. This one is forward-looking. Both of these are forward-looking. So, I'm just curious, how do people think I felt when I heard, in some circumstances, you could be less chatty? Was I happy with that? Was I like, oh my God, what the heck?
Sad trombone.
Yeah, very, very sad trombone. Okay, great. Fantastic. So, you're correct. In the initial time, when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I'm an extrovert. I like to talk to people. Like, come on. So I have to think about that. That's already a flag for me. And then we have this other one down here. Communicate less. And I've already told you I'm a project manager. I'm a program manager. So that's great. Excellent. So the reason why I call those 2 out is because I'm telling you that I had an emotional reaction when I heard it. Right? That's already my first flag to say, oh, you gotta have something here that you need to pay attention to. We haven't yet decided what I'm paying attention to, but I've noticed that it's happened. So this is the original data. I've not assessed anything. Now I'm going to check for bias. So, and we can actually kind of see it. In this purple one, the communicate less, I've identified this after thinking about the context of this relationship. I said, this is actually the other person. This is not me. This is the other person. Now, you don't know this, but this was a person on my team, and we had a lot of friction in our relationship, right? At the time, I was a project manager. They're an engineer. We're not clicking. We're having problems, okay? So from their perspective, they would very much like it if I would go away and stop asking them when the work is going to get done, right? But I can't stop asking them when the work is going to get done because I have to deliver that information. The project has to be completed. So we already have a problem in that this request doesn't actually solve whatever the problem is. And then the blue one, top one, that's my bias. I had an emotional reaction to being told, you, an extrovert, who comes into a room and takes up a lot of space, is in sometimes taking up too much space. So I notice in myself that there's a ring of truth in that. Do I think it's great that it was phrased as chatty? No. Is there other things going on here? Sure. But does it change the fact that this person is telling me something important, that in a room you can't be the only one who's participating in a conversation? Yes, they are. So I've checked for my bias. I've noted that it's really only in these two places. Everything else, fairly standard, cool, whatever, we can move on. So now I'm going to layer in my assessment. The red one, the communicate less. I have to reject it. This is not possible. And at the time, with the context of the relationship, this is not really feedback about me. This is about the relationship and it not really working. Whether or not I did choose to do some other things to maybe resolve that is separate, but it's not actually feedback for me. I actually don't need to communicate less. Does that make sense? Yeah, I see nods. Okay. The yellow ones, we didn't talk about in the other two because it's not bias related, but these are actually outside of the scope of what I do. It's either outside of the scope of it or it's, oh, well, that would be nice, but that's not really feedback that's attached to your role. So creating a retrospective template bank and rebalancing resources across the company. Okay, the top one, yeah, sure, if I have extra time, great. That I could do that. That's fine. And then the bottom one, I don't really have full control over that. I could probably try and influence some of this situation. I could maybe work on this for my team, but this is not a thing that I can just go do. And then this one, the nothing identified should be a bit of a flag to you. What's actually happening here, you might think, actually, I'm going to stop. What do you think is happening here with nothing identified? This person said, oh no, there's nothing you could do. There's nothing you could do.
I think they're totally given up on you.
Oh, that's a possibility. They've given up on me. Yep, that's totally possible.
Why is your mother working there?
Yeah, that's my mom. That's what, she loves him so much. She's just like, you're great. You don't need to do anything else.
They felt uncomfortable giving feedback.
They felt uncomfortable giving me feedback, and that's exactly right. So that's exactly what's happening. This person and I were still new to working together. We were developing psychological safety. We're trying, right? But we're not there yet. And so this person said, now is not the right time for me to give you whatever feedback that I have. I want to keep that to myself, and we'll just continue to work on developing this relationship because right now it's positive but new. That's a great flag. So if you hear this when you go and ask for feedback, you should think about like what are the circumstances in which someone would not be providing me feedback. Sometimes legitimately it's they just love you really great and they just don't want you to do anything different. They can't think of anything. But you'll know that from the context of your relationship. You know from your working relationship with them if they're like, you're great, you always deliver, it's fantastic, I love working with you, versus like, no, nothing, it's fine. You can tell the difference, right? So we've layered in our assessments. I've chosen what to reject. I've chosen what to say is neutral, is outside of the scope of this. So in the green, I have the things that I've accepted, which includes the one that triggered my bias, right? They're correct. They're correct. And now that I've accepted it, I need to move into the growth stage. So from the feedback that you accept, the ones that you say, okay, that seems legitimate, You want to determine your action items and then implement them. Feedback does not stop just because you ask them for it. If you go and ask for feedback and you get legitimate feedback back, that was a lot of B's in that sentence, you cannot just not do anything. You have to do something so that the next time that you go through the feedback process, people trust you and they're like, ah, yes, when I gave Cori feedback, she did something about it and now it's better. So the next time I provide feedback, I can also be clear and honest and transparent. If you skip this step, people will stop trusting you. They won't believe that when you ask for feedback, you really mean it. They'll think it's performative, which also isn't working for you because, again, the whole reason why we're doing this is for our own individual growth. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't actually go do something about it. So these are the real world. Obviously, I had more like client names and stuff, whatever in here, right? But this is essentially what I did, is I took all of that and I said, these are the 3 areas that I'm going to try and improve in over the next year, half year, because I do this twice a year, and see whether or not it resolves. So you don't actually have to have an action item attached to literally every single piece of feedback you get. It's more around what were the areas in which people were saying, hey, this is an area of strength, hey, this is an area of weakness, and then where do I want to focus into it? And 3 is pretty good. You know, don't go more than this because you're not going to be able to accomplish it realistically within 6 months if you're pulled in 8 different directions. And it probably means you didn't continue analyzing what you heard long enough to like group it into something. And then repeat. Because I told you, you don't get to do it just once and then be done with it. You have to do it again. A really great starting point is 6 months, where you do something that's more formal, not attached whatsoever to any like performance feedback that your company gives you, whatever their process is, like that's excluded. And about 6 months is enough for things to have changed and for people to be willing to talk to you again. Because a lot of times people are like, hey, they don't want to do this, it's not fun. Fair enough. And if you don't give enough time between when you're asking, people will be like, I don't know what to tell you. You talked to me like 35 days ago. Nothing's changed. It doesn't mean you can't ask for like spot feedback, but don't do this whole process that frequently. So hopefully that helped. I don't know. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Yeah.
Any tips on incorporating this kind of approach? I liked what you said, by the way. It's very interesting. Incorporating into regular communication with your supervisor. I have a weekly one-on-one with my manager. That's a natural setting in which I could say, you know, what could I do better or etc. But also semi-nerve-wracking setting in which to do so.
Yeah, totally. You absolutely can. Whatever cadence makes the most sense to you, you can do. In the one-on-ones, a lot of people will incorporate growth-related conversations, right? So you're not even talking about feedback. They'll just be like, how do you want to grow or whatever. Yeah. And if you have a process already like that set up with your managers, then adding the feedback piece into it is a good step. So would also going out and doing this with your team and then going back to your manager and saying, hey, I'm intending to do this every 6 months or something like that. This is the first time I'm doing it. Yeah. This is what I heard. That also might be a good idea if you have a good relationship with your manager.
Nice. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Given that this is like a cadence where you would be doing it over and over again, do you have any sort of tools that you'd like to use to track this over time or help to facilitate the process?
Yeah, I'm a huge nerd. So I made my own custom spreadsheet that allows me to track certain like growth stats as I go through. I don't know if you're... An easy way to start that would be to literally just have an Excel sheet or a sheet where every single time you go through it, you have the person's name, the 3 questions that you asked, and either attach like a notes doc. Like you should be taking notes when you're talking to people, by the way. Or if you have enough space, which is what I do, I paraphrase and I type in the cells. And then from that, I do my analysis where I'm checking for bias and all that kind of stuff. And then I condense it down into my goals from there. So it's kind of like a multi-layered sheet option. Which then at Palantir we have something called pods, which is like you have a company representative and a discipline-ish related person, and I take that to them and I'm like, hey, I did it again. Here's all the raw feedback that I got. Here's what I'm taking from it. This is what I'm working on. So to bring transparency and accountability into that system as well. But I totally do track.
Excuse me, do you have an example of the Excel sheet that you said you made?
I don't have one that I can share on this screen because it's not it doesn't have stuff that's wiped from it. But if you message me on LinkedIn, I would be or Drupal Slack, I'd be happy to send you a clean version of what I use.
Okay, appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. I work on a fully remote team,
Mm.
so a lot of our communication is asynchronous.
Yeah.
Would you definitely aim to always do this as a face-to-face video chat, or would it be fair to send like, hey, could you answer these couple questions and like take your time answering?
Yeah, you could totally do either way. I also work in a fully distributed company, but I prefer to do face-to-face video calls because I want to hear like the tone. I want to hear how things are phrased more like as well as the actual information that's being given to me, because that will help me assess like what exactly did they mean when it feels a little bit ambiguous. But you totally, if you have like a fully remote team and you guys are like not all in the same time zone or something like that, you could totally do the feedback survey. I just wouldn't solely rely on it. I wouldn't make every single cycle just that. Anything else?
Well, I have a, not weird, but I'm going to retire soon. I want to do more with my photography. I joined a photography club.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go and get feedback or whatever. I'm thinking more in a mass sort of way, present pictures, get feedback as to, how they could be improved and everything else. Do you have any ideas on that, separate from this, which is much more of it seems like a one-on-one kind of process?
I mean, I would open that up to other people if they have anything that they think might work. What I could think of is if you are sending this like online, like you just want to send like an email blast out and was like, hey, I'm curious about your feedback. You could upload the photos somewhere and then attach a Google survey or some other kind of survey and just see what people say on it. But similarly to the drawbacks and the benefits of a feedback survey versus in person or face, however you want to call it, in this setting, fewer instances, but that are more direct, more synchronous rather than an asynchronous method will yield you better results than a anonymized or asynchronous feedback system. You'll get more out of one conversation with one person than you would probably from sending a feedback survey to 5 different people where they're not talking to you. Just because of the way that people don't like surveys, they don't want to spend the time to fill it out, they don't trust if they put it in writing if it's really anonymous, they don't, like there's all sorts of barriers to like surveys that have nothing to do with the feedback process but are just barriers to that medium in general. So you could combo it.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of showing a picture in a meeting.
Yeah, you could. If you get your photography friends in a room.
Doing a Slack thing so they can, either anonymously or yell out.
Yeah, you could host a coffee thing at your house and put it on your television and be like, what do you think?
And I think those questions you offered, the what am I doing well, I should keep doing, and where's an area I can improve, and sort of open that up. Because you might learn interesting things both ways. Like you might be doing something great that they're like, and you're great with depth of field. You're like, oh, I just sort of gutted it. Yeah. And similar with, something you might have just missed out on, like, oh, I could fill this leg over here. Didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, I don't want to monopolize. I'll basically tell them I'm an idiot.
Hey. I let people tell me I'm an idiot. I don't start it for them, but yeah.
At the risk of disclosing, I'm going to ask a question about when disabilities affect face-to-face interactions, what can you do to mitigate the obviously pointing out the liabilities of indirect
Yeah.
contact.
I'm not an expert in that area, so just to, like, full transparency, I have thoughts, just generally because I've done this, but I'm not an expert, so there may very well be, like, tools that I am completely unaware of that could help in this situation. I would hope that for folks who are disabled, and also for folks who are neuroatypical, where they're really uncomfortable with the idea of face-to-face feedback, your colleagues hopefully care enough about you to be willing to adjust to meet your needs, right? That is the hope that you would have, is that they have the context of who you are as a person. And so if you as a person would have a better result with a feedback survey, that's totally fine. It doesn't mean that you don't use it or that you can't use it. All I'm saying is that there are some drawbacks to it. So to the extent that you see those drawbacks showing up in your results, you need to correct for them in how you analyze it, or how you choose to move forward. Like, one thought might be, once you have, let's say you do the anonymous feedback survey or some kind of feedback survey, and you get a bunch of stuff, you do your analysis, and then you share more broadly what you think you heard and what you're going to work on, right? So that your team feels like, oh, I didn't just put it into a black box. I actually, like, something came out of it, which is really important for this whole process to work long term, is that people feel like they're connected to you in the feedback situation. People really don't like giving critical feedback asynchronously. They don't like it in person either. I'm not saying that people love to give it in person, but they really have a hard time with it asynchronously because they don't know how you're responding to it, right? They're going to be like, oh my God, did I, like, freak them out? Do they hate me now? Like, I don't know. I didn't see their face. I couldn't hear their tone. Like, yeah.
And if you're comfortable, you could frame it as an accommodation explicitly when you say, like, I'm doing this way because of this. This is accommodation, but still feel free to, and I try to personalize it
Totally.
with that context.
The more you can personalize it, the better your results will be for the survey version, for sure. Anything else? Great. Please go do it and try.